The company had always prided itself on its cutting-edge technology and highly efficient team, but what the CEO didn't know was that behind the polished corporate exterior, there was a different story unfolding in the workplace. As the leader of a multi-million-dollar corporation, he had always been removed from the daily grind of his employees. His role was one of strategy, innovation, and high-level meetings. He trusted his managers and supervisors to oversee the day-to-day operations and take care of any issues. But over the years, small whispers began to surface. Employees complained about feeling unheard, unappreciated, and underpaid. There were murmurs about the company's internal environment being toxic, but the CEO always dismissed these as isolated complaints, never fully understanding the depth of the dissatisfaction brewing within his workforce. He had always been in the boardroom, making important decisions, and managing the bigger picture. What he didn't realize was that the heart of his company, the employees, were the ones who held everything together. Without their well-being, his success was in jeopardy. Curious to understand more about the daily realities of his employees, the CEO decided to conduct an experiment. It wasn't going to be an ordinary corporate visit, though. Instead, he would go undercover. Disguising himself as a janitor, he would slip into the background and observe his employees without them knowing. No meetings, no cameras, just a simple uniform and a mop. He thought this would give him an honest look at how things were really running, away from the polished facade. The idea felt risky, but he was determined to see for himself. If he could just gain a genuine understanding of what was happening, he would have a better chance of turning things around. He was a hands-on leader in every other aspect of his life, so why not in this? A little nervous, but resolute, he told only a few trusted advisors about his plan. It was time for him to experience the company from a completely different perspective. The CEO donned a simple janitor's outfit, gray pants, a worn-out shirt, and a cleaning cart filled with supplies. He opted for a standard uniform, nothing too fancy, so as not to attract any attention. He even practiced a few lines in his head, just in case someone asked him for help. Just a janitor, he reminded himself. It was going to be strange, but he had committed to it. He arrived at the office early in the morning, before most employees had started their day. The building was eerily quiet, except for the sound of humming lights and the soft rustle of papers. His heart raced a little as he stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to take him to the first floor. He hadn't been in the halls like this in years, and everything felt different. He knew the layout, of course, but now, as he stood there in a janitor's uniform, he felt like an outsider. His mind buzzed with anticipation. When he arrived, he quickly got to work, pushing his cleaning cart down the hallways, wiping surfaces, emptying trash cans, and scrubbing the floors. He was meticulous, making sure everything was spotless, all while keeping a low profile. He didn't want anyone to look too closely at him or ask too many questions. He was just a part of the background, blending in. It wasn't long before his first encounter came. A young woman in a business suit passed by him, not noticing who he was. She gave a polite nod as she walked to her office. A few moments later, he overheard her talking on the phone in her office, her voice carrying through the thin walls. He stopped to listen, pretending to mop the floor as he tried to eavesdrop on her conversation. The woman was speaking to a colleague about the latest corporate initiative, which was supposed to improve employee morale. But from her tone, it was clear that she wasn't buying it. "It's all talk," she said with a sigh. "They always promise change, but nothing ever changes. The CEO doesn't even know what it's really like here." His heart sank at her words. It was like a slap in the face, and yet he knew it was the truth. He had always assumed that his high-level strategies were enough to make a difference, but clearly, the employees felt differently. They were the ones on the ground, doing the hard work, and they were the ones who knew the truth about the company's culture. After finishing the cleaning task in that section of the office, he moved on to the next floor. As he walked, he passed more employees, some of whom greeted him politely, but there was a noticeable distance. A few even avoided eye contact. He couldn't help but wonder what they really thought of him, especially since they didn't recognize him as the CEO. Were they just indifferent, or did they have something more to say if they knew who he really was? Later, as he was cleaning the break room, he overheard a conversation between two employees sitting by the coffee machine. One of them, a middle-aged man, was venting about the constant pressure from management. "They expect us to give 110% all the time," he said, frustration in his voice. "But they don't appreciate us. I haven't had a raise in 2 years. You know what the CEO did last year? He bought himself a new yacht while we're here scraping by." The CEO's stomach twisted. He had always prided himself on being a generous boss. But hearing that from one of his employees made him realize that the disparity between his actions and their perceptions was wider than he ever imagined. He had assumed that his generosity in other areas, donations to charity, sponsoring community events, would make up for the lack of recognition at the workplace. But clearly, that wasn't the case. The employees didn't feel valued, and it hurt him to hear it so plainly. As the day wore on, the CEO began to see a pattern. The employees were overworked, underappreciated, and disengaged. The work culture, which he thought was thriving, was actually one of quiet dissatisfaction. He had been so focused on the bottom line, the numbers, and the company's external success, that he had ignored the internal struggles of his workforce. His success had come at a cost: human connection and understanding. By the time his shift ended, the CEO was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. He had learned more in one day as a janitor than he had in years as a CEO. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. The real work was going to come when he confronted his team with what he had learned. Little did he know that his undercover experiment would change the course of the company forever. What he discovered about his employees would leave him speechless, and it would set him on a path to make things right. The next day, the CEO woke up feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency. He had experienced the office from a perspective he never thought possible, one that was raw, real, and full of truth. The employees had spoken in hushed tones, sharing frustrations that had been brewing for years. He had seen firsthand how out of touch he had been with his own company. His position at the top had shielded him from the challenges his employees faced every single day. It was a humbling experience. As he walked into his own office, his mind raced with ideas, concerns, and a deep feeling of responsibility. He couldn't just pretend like nothing had happened. He needed to do something. But what? The reality he had uncovered wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple gesture or a public statement. It was deeper than that. It was about changing the culture of the company itself, re-establishing trust, and addressing the disconnect between leadership and employees. He took his seat at his desk, staring at the stack of reports in front of him. Normally, this would be his focus: numbers, projections, and market analysis. But today, none of that mattered. It was the people that mattered. He thought about the woman in the office, talking about how the company's promises always fell short. She wasn't the only one feeling that way. He could feel the weight of her words pressing on him. The CEO knew that he had to address this issue directly. There was no way around it. The first step would be to approach the upper management team. They had to be on board with a new vision for the company, one that placed employee well-being and engagement at the center. But even before that, he knew he had to talk to the people directly. He needed to break down the barriers between himself and his employees. No more suits, no more conferences, he needed to be human again. But how could he make such a dramatic shift? He had been in charge for years, and his leadership style had been one of authority and command. Suddenly, the idea of stepping back and letting the employees speak freely without fear seemed daunting. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was an individual who had witnessed the pain of his employees firsthand. It wasn't enough to throw money at the problem or make some token gesture. He needed to listen, truly listen. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was his executive assistant, Yari. "Sir, the board has asked if you're available for a meeting today. They're eager to discuss the upcoming quarterly presentation. The meeting is in 30 minutes. The CEO glanced at his watch. 30 minutes. He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't prepared to go back to the same routine just yet. "Cancel it. Tell them I'm busy," he replied, his voice more forceful than he intended. Yari looked at him for a moment, clearly surprised. "Understood," she said, before leaving without another word. The CEO leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had never been one to shy away from meetings or corporate events, but today, everything felt different. It felt superficial. The real work was down in the trenches, where his employees were struggling. Suddenly, an idea formed in his mind. It was bold. It was risky. But it might just work. After several hours of deliberation and weighing the options, he decided that he would hold a town hall meeting with the entire company. No agenda, no scripts, just a conversation. He would ask the employees to be open, honest, and unfiltered. It would be the complete opposite of a corporate presentation. No polish, no pretense. Just raw truth. The CEO drafted an email, explaining that there would be an open meeting the following week, where employees could share their thoughts, ideas, and frustrations in a safe, anonymous environment. The email didn't just promise change, it asked for input. He wasn't going to sit there and lecture. He was going to listen. The following days were filled with tension as the date of the town hall approached. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would people show up? Would they even speak? And if they did, would they trust him enough to be honest? As the day of the meeting arrived, the CEO stood in front of a packed conference room. His hands trembled slightly as he took the microphone. It had been a long time since he'd felt so nervous. This wasn't about business deals or strategic goals. This was about his future as a leader, and the future of his company. "I know that you all have many questions," the CEO began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I'm not here to give you answers right away. I'm here to listen. I want to hear your thoughts, your concerns, and your ideas. But most importantly, I want to understand what's really going on here. I want to hear the truth, even if it's hard." He paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the surprise on the faces in the room. No one had ever heard him speak like this before. For years, he had been the one making decisions, setting the course for the company. Today, though, he was just a man who wanted to make things right. A long silence followed. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath. The employees were hesitant, unsure of how to react. They had heard speeches like this before, empty promises from a CEO who would move on to the next project without ever really listening. But this time, there was something different in his tone. Something genuine. They could sense it. Finally, a young man in the back row raised his hand. "I've been here for 3 years, he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't want to sound negative, but I feel like the company doesn't care about us. We work hard every day, and it feels like we're just a number. We never hear from you, sir. We don't know what's going on with the company. It's like we're invisible." The CEO felt a pang in his chest. The young man's words were like a punch to the gut. This was the reality he had been avoiding. This was what his employees had been carrying for years. Another employee spoke up, a middle-aged woman who had been with the company for over a decade. "We're expected to give our all, but we don't see the same dedication from leadership. We hear about new projects, big plans, but we're never part of those decisions. It's always a top-down approach." The communication is terrible. The CEO nodded silently, taking in every word. Each sentence felt like another crack in the facade he had built for himself. But he knew that this was the only way forward. He couldn't fix anything until he truly understood what was wrong. As the meeting went on, more and more employees spoke up. Some were calm, others were visibly upset, but each one shared their truth. The CEO remained silent, absorbing their words, acknowledging their feelings. He had asked for honesty, and he was getting it. The town hall meeting lasted for hours, but by the end, the CEO felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of clarity. He had been so focused on success, on making the company profitable, that he had forgotten about the people who made it all possible. The employees weren't just workers, they were the lifeblood of the organization. Without them, there was nothing. As the meeting ended, the CEO stood before his employees, humbled and grateful. He could see the change in their faces. They weren't convinced yet, but they had seen a glimpse of the leader they had been longing for, a leader who would listen, not just command. The CEO knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He couldn't undo the years of neglect with one meeting, but it was a start. A long overdue start. And as he left the room that day, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was his chance to rewrite the narrative. This was his chance to make things right. The CEO's decision to hold the town hall had sent ripples throughout the company. For the first time in years, employees felt heard. The initial shock of the CEO's vulnerability in listening to their concerns had worn off, and now, a sense of cautious optimism began to take root. The questions, complaints, and suggestions that had been buried for far too long were now out in the open. But as the CEO left the meeting, he knew the real work was just beginning. He spent the following days in deep reflection, analyzing everything that had been shared in the town hall. The pain in the employees' voices, their frustration, their unmet needs, it was all clear now. But more importantly, the root of the problem was staring him in the face. The culture of the company had eroded. What had once been a place of shared vision, innovation, and mutual respect had become a machine, a cold, unfeeling entity focused on output rather than the well-being of the people behind it. He felt a deep sense of responsibility. The company wasn't just a brand or a logo. It was a living, breathing organism made up of people who gave their best every day. And yet, somehow, they felt forgotten. The CEO knew he couldn't just change things overnight. He couldn't make up for the years of neglect, the countless missed opportunities to truly connect with his workforce. But he had to try. The future of the company depended on it. Over the next few weeks, the CEO embarked on a journey of transformation, both for himself and for the company. He realized that leading wasn't just about making decisions at the top and passing down orders. It was about fostering relationships, trust, and collaboration at every level. His role had to change, and that meant he needed to be more present, more engaged, and more human in his interactions with the employees. One of the first things he did was to initiate a series of small, informal meetings with different departments. He didn't schedule grand boardroom sessions or present flashy presentations. Instead, he showed up in the break rooms, in the hallways, and even in the parking lot. He wanted to talk to employees in the places where they felt comfortable, where they could speak freely. He wanted to get to know them as people, not just as workers. The response was overwhelming. At first, employees were hesitant. They had grown accustomed to a leadership style that was distant and detached. But as the CEO continued to show up in their daily spaces, their guard began to lower. He listened, not just with his ears but with his heart. He asked questions, showed genuine interest in their lives, and, most importantly, he validated their experiences. "I've been here for 7 years," said a woman who worked in customer service. "And this is the first time I've ever had a conversation with anyone from upper management that felt real." Another employee, a warehouse worker, spoke about the long hours and the lack of Recognition. I know the company's doing well, but sometimes it feels like we're just working ourselves to the bone without any appreciation. It's hard to stay motivated when you don't see the company as a place that values you. The CEO nodded, feeling the weight of their words. He had always thought of himself as a leader who provided for his team, good salaries, excellent benefits, and a strong reputation. But now he understood that these tangible rewards were not enough. Employees didn't just need compensation. They needed a sense of purpose, recognition, and respect. They needed to feel seen. After these small meetings, the CEO began to notice subtle shifts in the atmosphere of the company. Employees were beginning to feel more engaged. They were smiling more, collaborating more, and, most importantly, they were speaking up. Ideas that had previously been ignored were now being heard. But there was still much to be done. The deep-rooted issues, the toxic behaviors, and the lack of trust, those things wouldn't disappear overnight. The CEO knew he had to address the heart of the problem, the management team. If the culture of the company was going to change, it had to start from the top down. So, he called an emergency meeting with the senior leaders and executives. They were skeptical, of course. They had seen the CEO act as a distant figure for years, making decisions without consulting them. But now, there was a shift in his tone, a sense of urgency and commitment that they hadn't heard before. "We've been failing our employees," the CEO began, his voice steady but firm. "And I'm as much to blame as anyone. We've focused too much on profits, too much on numbers, and not enough on the people who make this company what it is. We've lost sight of what truly matters." There was silence in the room as the executives processed his words. Finally, one of them spoke up. "But how do we change that? How do we fix something that's been broken for so long?" The CEO paused, looking each person in the eye. "It starts with us. We need to be more transparent, more connected. We need to stop thinking of ourselves as the management team and start thinking of ourselves as part of the greater whole. We need to build trust with our employees again." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were disagreements, defensiveness, and reluctance. Some executives were resistant to the idea of changing their established ways of working. But the CEO pushed forward, refusing to back down. He knew this was the only way forward. He had to lead by example, and that meant being willing to confront the difficult truths. One of the biggest challenges was to rework the company's internal communications. The lack of transparency had been one of the biggest complaints from employees. They didn't know what was happening at the top, and as a result, they felt disconnected from the company's vision. The CEO and his team worked together to create a new communication strategy, one that was open, frequent, and inclusive. They started holding regular all-staff meetings where they shared updates on the company's performance, goals, and challenges. They encouraged employees to ask questions, voice their concerns, and offer suggestions. But even as they made progress in some areas, the CEO knew that the most difficult task was ahead of him, rebuilding trust. The damage had been done over many years, and the scars were deep. Many employees had lost faith in the leadership team, and it wasn't going to be easy to win them back. To address this, the CEO made a bold decision. He would not only continue to show up at informal meetings but also bring in an outside consultant to help with company culture. The consultant would work directly with the employees to identify key areas of improvement and develop strategies for restoring trust. It wasn't going to be a quick fix, but the CEO was committed to doing whatever it took. Meanwhile, he continued to stay connected with his employees. He walked the halls, spoke with them in the break rooms, and attended lunch with various teams. He wanted to see them not just as workers, but as people with lives, dreams, and aspirations beyond the office walls. One day, as he was walking through the warehouse, he stopped to speak with a man who had been there for years. The man had always been quiet, always stayed in the background, and had rarely engaged with upper management. But today, he spoke up. "You know, I've been with the company a long time," the man said, his voice rough but sincere. "And I've seen a lot of CEOs come and go. But I've never seen one take the time to really listen before. It feels different this time." The CEO nodded, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. It was only one conversation, but it meant everything. It meant that change was possible. It meant that, perhaps, after all these years, the company was finally heading in the right direction. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. There was still so much work to be done. The culture needed to be rebuilt, trust needed to be restored, and the employees needed to feel valued once again. But for the first time in a long while, the CEO felt hope. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that with honesty, vulnerability, and a genuine desire to change, the company could be transformed. The journey wasn't over yet. But it had begun. The CEO's commitment to rebuilding trust and improving the culture at the company wasn't an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. The town hall meeting had been a turning point, a moment of clarity when the CEO had heard firsthand just how deep the dissatisfaction ran. The town hall had given the employees a platform to express their frustrations, but it had also been a moment of realization for the CEO. He understood that trust couldn't be restored with empty words. It would require consistent action and genuine engagement, not just occasional appearances. For weeks, the CEO continued to work tirelessly on creating meaningful change. He had already begun implementing some of the suggestions made by the employees during the town hall. He started by overhauling the company's internal communication structure, ensuring that updates were more frequent, transparent, and accessible. There would be no more secrets or hidden agendas. Every employee, regardless of their position, would have access to the information they needed to feel informed and engaged. But communication was just the first step. The bigger challenge was addressing the company's internal culture. The CEO had already realized that the old top-down management style wasn't working. It had created an environment where employees felt disconnected, ignored, and undervalued. The company had become a machine, efficient, yes, but devoid of the human element that made it truly special. The heart of the company had been lost in the pursuit of profits and performance. The CEO knew he had to lead by example. He had to show his employees that he wasn't just listening to them, but that he was willing to take the steps necessary to create real change. It wasn't enough to have casual conversations or send out emails. He needed to make bold moves that would demonstrate his commitment to rebuilding the company's foundation. One of the first major changes the CEO implemented was the introduction of Employee Appreciation Weeks. These weeks would focus on recognizing the hard work and dedication of the company's staff, with activities that would highlight their contributions. The idea was to make employees feel valued, not just as workers, but as people who were essential to the company's success. During these appreciation weeks, employees would have the chance to nominate colleagues for recognition, and the CEO would personally thank them for their efforts. At first, some employees were skeptical. It had been years since they had felt genuinely appreciated. They had grown accustomed to working tirelessly without recognition. But as the appreciation weeks began to unfold, they started to see that the CEO wasn't just paying lip service to their needs. He was actively trying to foster a culture of gratitude and respect. Employees began to feel more connected to one another, and they could see that their hard work was being noticed. The CEO also began making small changes in how meetings were conducted. He knew that one of the biggest complaints from the employees had been that their voices were never heard. They had felt like they were always on the outside looking in. To change this, the CEO made a point of including employees from all levels of the company in key decision-making processes. He invited people from various departments to participate in meetings, and he encouraged them to share their thoughts, ideas, and concerns. It was no longer just the senior leadership team making all the decisions. The CEO wanted to ensure that everyone had a seat at the table. At first, there was resistance. Some senior managers were uncomfortable with the idea of involving lower-level employees in decision-making. They were used to the old way of doing things, where decisions were made in boardrooms and passed down from above. But the CEO stood firm. He knew that true change would require breaking down the barriers that separated leadership from the rest of the company. By giving employees a voice in the decision-making process, he hoped to create a sense of ownership and accountability within the organization. As time passed, the CEO continued to engage with his employees. He made sure to keep the lines of communication open and regularly checked in with various teams to get their feedback. He also encouraged them to share their ideas for improving the workplace. While some were initially hesitant, many employees began to offer suggestions for how the company could improve its processes, enhance productivity, and create a more positive environment. The CEO took every suggestion seriously, even if it seemed small or insignificant. He understood that every idea, no matter how big or small, was valuable. But there was one area where the CEO knew the company needed to make significant changes: employee well-being. The company's fast-paced, high-pressure environment had taken a toll on the employees' mental and physical health. Stress levels were high, and burnout was common. The CEO realized that in order to foster a positive, productive environment, he needed to prioritize employee well-being and work-life balance. In response, the CEO introduced several initiatives designed to promote wellness within the workplace. He partnered with wellness experts to create programs focused on stress management, fitness, and mental health. Employees were given more flexibility in their work schedules, allowing them to better balance their personal and professional lives. The company even offered on-site yoga classes and meditation sessions to help employees de-stress during their workday. While some employees were initially skeptical about these new initiatives, they soon began to see the benefits. Many reported feeling less stressed and more energized, and the overall atmosphere in the office began to shift. Employees started to programs, and they appreciated the calm. Look forward to the wellness programs, and they appreciated the company's commitment to their well-being. The CEO noticed a tangible improvement in the overall morale of the staff. People were smiling more, interacting with one another, and showing a renewed sense of energy. However, the CEO knew that these changes alone wouldn't be enough to truly transform the company. The culture had been broken for so long that it would take time to rebuild the trust and sense of community that had been lost. He knew that he had to keep pushing forward, constantly seeking new ways to improve and refine the company's approach to leadership and employee engagement. One of the most significant challenges the CEO faced was addressing the underlying issues that had led to the company's toxic culture in the first place. There were ingrained behaviors and attitudes that needed to be unlearned. Some of the senior managers still clung to the old way of doing things, reluctant to embrace the changes that the CEO was championing. There were also employees who had grown so disillusioned with the company that they had stopped caring. For these employees, no amount of recognition or wellness programs would be enough to win them back. The CEO recognized that he had to confront these issues head-on. He couldn't just make superficial changes and expect everything to improve. He needed to hold people accountable for their actions and ensure that the company's new values were being upheld at every level. One of the first steps he took was to implement a system of feedback and accountability for all employees. This system would allow employees to anonymously rate their managers and provide feedback on their leadership style. The CEO believed that transparency and accountability were crucial to rebuilding trust. If managers were not living up to the company's new values, they would be held responsible. The feedback system allowed employees to speak up without fear of retaliation, and it gave the CEO valuable insights into how his leadership team was performing. The CEO also instituted regular culture audits, where he and his leadership team would assess the company's progress in terms of employee engagement, well-being, and overall satisfaction. These audits were designed to ensure that the company was staying on track and making real progress. The CEO knew that these audits would hold everyone accountable and that they would help identify areas where further improvement was needed. As the months passed, the CEO could see the fruits of his labor. While it was still a work in progress, there were noticeable improvements in the company's culture. Employees were more engaged, more collaborative, and more committed to their work. They felt a renewed sense of pride in the company, and they were excited about the direction it was heading. The CEO's efforts were starting to pay off, but he knew that the real test would come when the company faced its next challenge. He had no illusions that everything was perfect. He knew that there would always be obstacles to overcome and setbacks to deal with. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future. He had made a promise to his employees that he would create a company where they felt valued, heard, and respected. And he was determined to keep that promise. As the CEO moved further into the journey of transforming his company, he began to realize the magnitude of the changes that needed to happen. The new initiatives he had put in place, employee appreciation weeks, wellness programs, open communication, were already showing positive results. Employees were feeling more heard, more valued, and more connected to the company. However, the deeper issues within the company's culture were not so easily addressed. The CEO understood that these changes were just the beginning. The real challenge lay in reshaping the company's mindset, and he knew that it would take a lot more time and effort to bring about lasting transformation. One of the most pressing concerns for the CEO was overcoming the resistance from certain members of the senior management team. While some executives had embraced the new direction and were fully on board with the cultural shift, there were others who remained entrenched in the old ways of thinking. They had been successful in the past with a hierarchical structure that focused on profits, efficiency, and top-down management, and they were not convinced that the changes the CEO was advocating for were necessary. These executives believed that the company's growth and success had been driven by the very approach that the CEO was now attempting to change. They didn't see the value in prioritizing employee well-being, promoting a more inclusive decision-making process, or focusing on transparency. They feared that these new approaches might weaken the company's competitive edge and slow down its progress. The CEO knew that he had to address this resistance head-on. He couldn't allow a few skeptical executives to undermine the progress the company had made. At the same time, he didn't want to alienate those who had supported his vision. The challenge was balancing these differing viewpoints and bringing everyone on board with the changes that were necessary for the company's future. The CEO decided to schedule a series of one-on-one meetings with the resistant executives. He wanted to understand their concerns better and have an open dialogue about the company's future. These meetings were critical not only for building trust with his leadership team but also for demonstrating his commitment to fostering an open and collaborative environment at every level of the company. The first meeting was with Gregor, the company's head of operations. Gregor had been with the company for over 20 years, and he was highly respected for his efficiency and expertise in running the day-to-day operations. However, he was also one of the most resistant to the CEO's new approach. When Gregor entered the CEO's office, the tension was palpable. Both men had always maintained a professional relationship, but there had never been much personal connection. The CEO could tell that Gregor was skeptical of the changes he was implementing, and he needed to break through that barrier. "Gregor," the CEO began, "I know this transition isn't easy, especially for someone who's been with the company for as long as you have. I value your experience, and I want to hear what you think about the changes we're making." Gregor sat down, folding his arms across his chest. "I've been here a long time," he said, his voice low but firm. "And I've seen how things work. We've been successful because we've been efficient. We've kept costs low, streamlined operations, and focused on performance. This new approach, prioritizing employee well-being and inclusion, sounds like a distraction to me." The CEO listened carefully, not interrupting. He knew that Gregor's concerns were valid, but he also understood that they were based on a narrow view of what success meant. He had to get Gregor to see the bigger picture. "I hear you," the CEO replied. "But let me ask you something. How do we sustain that efficiency and performance in the long term if our employees are burning out? How do we continue to be a leader in the industry if the people who make our success possible don't feel appreciated or engaged?" Gregor didn't respond immediately. The question seemed to linger in the air. After a few moments of silence, he sighed. "I suppose you have a point," Gregor admitted. "But I'm worried that if we spend too much time focusing on these programs, we'll lose sight of our goals. We need to stay competitive." The CEO nodded. "I agree. We have to stay competitive. But what I'm trying to build is a culture that helps us do just that. A culture where people are not just cogs in a machine but contributors to a larger mission. I'm not suggesting we abandon efficiency or performance. I'm suggesting that we enhance those things by making sure our employees are healthy, engaged, and feel like they're part of something meaningful." Gregor was quiet for a moment, thinking it over. The CEO didn't rush him. He knew that real change would take time, especially when it came to deeply ingrained beliefs. "I'll think about it," Gregor said finally, a softening in his tone. "I can't promise I'll be fully on board, but I'll give it some thought." The CEO smiled, feeling a sense of relief. He knew that wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step in the right direction. These conversations were important. They weren't about forcing anyone to agree with him, they were about starting a dialogue, understanding different perspectives, and working together to find a solution that everyone could embrace. The next meeting was with Elena, the company's head of marketing. Elena had always been a more progressive thinker, and while she had supported the CEO's efforts in the past, she too had concerns about the long-term viability of the new approach. "Don't get me wrong," Elena began as they sat down for their meeting. "I think the new direction is great in theory. But do you really think it will work? Can a company as large as ours truly change its culture without losing the edge that's made us successful?" The CEO took a deep breath. "Elena, I think it can. But I don't expect it to be easy. It's not about changing overnight. It's about shifting our focus from short-term gains to long-term sustainability. It's about creating a company where people feel like they're a part of something bigger than just a job. If we can achieve that, I truly believe it will pay off in the long run." Elena leaned back in her chair, considering his words. She had always been someone who valued creativity, innovation, and out-of-the-box thinking. Perhaps this new approach could provide the balance the company needed to stay relevant and successful without sacrificing its culture. "You make a good point," Elena said after a moment. "Maybe the real challenge is convincing the rest of the team that this is a necessary change. But I'm willing to support it." The CEO smiled. "That's all I ask for. Together, we can make this work." As the weeks went by, more and more of the senior leadership team began to come around. They started to see the value in the CEO's approach. While there were still those who were hesitant, the tide was slowly turning. The CEO had planted the seeds of change, and now it was up to him and his leadership team to nurture them. However, the real challenge was in the trenches. The senior executives may have begun to shift their mindset, but the rest of the company was still adjusting. The CEO knew that the culture wouldn't change overnight, and he needed to make sure the employees saw the effort. He wanted them to know that the leadership team wasn't just paying lip service to change, they were actively working toward it. He began to implement regular feedback loops with the employees. Every month, he sent out a company-wide survey asking for input on the progress of the changes and areas where they could improve. He also made it a point to attend departmental meetings and hear directly from employees about their experiences. The employees' feedback wasn't always positive, and that was okay. The CEO understood that change was difficult, and he welcomed constructive criticism. It was a sign that the employees were engaged and invested in the company's future. Each survey and each conversation was an opportunity to learn and grow. The CEO also introduced a mentorship program to connect senior leaders with employees at lower levels. He believed that building relationships across the company would break down silos and create a stronger sense of unity. The mentorship program allowed employees to learn from one another, share ideas, and collaborate on new initiatives. By the end of the year, the company was beginning to feel different. Employees were more engaged, more connected, and more willing to offer their ideas. The sense of pride in the company was palpable. The CEO knew they still had a long way to go, but the transformation was underway. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and resistance along the way. But the CEO was committed. He had seen the power of change, and he was determined to make it last. As the months passed, the CEO's vision for the company began to take shape. The changes he had implemented were starting to show tangible results, but the road to transformation was far from over. The initial optimism was beginning to settle into something more practical and grounded. The challenge was now in maintaining momentum, ensuring that the shifts in culture didn't just fade away into the background once the excitement of the changes wore off. The first real test came when the company faced a downturn in the market. A global economic shift impacted their bottom line, and suddenly, the company was faced with tightening budgets, uncertain forecasts, and the looming threat of layoffs. For a while, the upbeat, employee-first environment that the CEO had cultivated seemed to hit a wall. Many of the initiatives, the wellness programs, the appreciation weeks, the open communications, were now at risk of being cut back to save money. The CEO knew that this was a critical moment. He could either double down on his commitment to his employees, reinforcing the values he had established, or he could follow the path of many other CEOs and make the difficult decision to scale back. The pressure was immense. In an environment where companies were shedding employees to survive, the idea of maintaining all the programs he had introduced seemed increasingly untenable. But the CEO wasn't about to back down. He had seen the impact these changes had on his employees, and he wasn't going to sacrifice their well-being for short-term financial gains. He called a meeting with the leadership team to discuss how they would approach the downturn and the difficult choices ahead. "We are facing some tough times," the CEO began, addressing his team. "I know that many of you are feeling the weight of this. Our business has taken a hit, and we have to be strategic about how we move forward. But we cannot forget what we've been building here. We cannot let this downturn be an excuse to reverse the progress we've made." There was a quiet murmur around the room. Gregor, the head of operations, spoke up first. "It's easy to say we'll keep everything in place, but the reality is that we need to cut costs. We need to streamline operations if we want to survive this." The CEO nodded but wasn't ready to concede. "I understand the need for efficiency. But we've worked hard to create a culture where our employees feel valued and appreciated. If we cut back on the very programs that have helped boost morale, we're going to lose the trust we've built. And when the market recovers, we'll have a much harder time rebuilding." The discussion went back and forth for hours, with the leadership team debating the pros and cons of keeping the new initiatives intact. But in the end, the CEO's argument won out. They would not scale back on employee engagement or well-being programs. Instead, they would look for other areas to streamline, areas that wouldn't directly impact the workforce. The decision wasn't easy, and the CEO knew that there would still be challenges ahead. But he was resolute in his belief that the company's culture was not just an optional luxury, it was the foundation of the company's long-term success. He couldn't afford to lose it, not when they were on the cusp of something truly great. The weeks that followed were challenging. Budgets were tight, and difficult decisions had to be made. But the CEO remained focused on his employees. He continued to show up at informal meetings, spending time with teams to reassure them that their contributions were valued, even if the company was facing a difficult financial situation. He made a point of acknowledging the tough circumstances and sharing the company's strategy for weathering the storm. One day, as he was walking through the building, the CEO stopped by the marketing team's office. Elena, the head of marketing, was working late on a project. When she saw the CEO standing in the doorway, she looked up and smiled. "You're still here?" the CEO asked, stepping into the office. "Just trying to make sure we're prepared for whatever's coming," Elena replied, clearly feeling the strain of the recent changes. "Things have been tough, but we're pushing through." The CEO nodded. "I know it's been hard, but I want you to know that I appreciate everything you and the team are doing. I know the company is facing some serious challenges, but we're going to get through this. And when we do, we'll come out stronger than ever." Elena looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "I appreciate that. But sometimes it feels like the changes we're making won't be enough to survive something like this. It feels like we're walking a tightrope, hoping not to fall." "I get it," the CEO replied. "But I don't think we're just walking a tightrope. I think we're building a foundation that's strong enough to weather even the hardest storms. We've made great strides, and the culture we've been building is a huge part of what will help us come out on the other side." Elena took a deep breath, considering his words. "I want to believe that," she said. "But the pressure is getting to everyone. It's hard to stay motivated when everything feels so uncertain." The CEO understood. He knew that the road ahead would be tough. But he also knew that this was the true test of the changes he had worked so hard to put in place. Now was the time to prove that employee engagement, transparency, and well-being weren't just nice-to-have initiatives, they were the core of a resilient, long-lasting company. As the weeks went by, the CEO continued to prioritize his employees, despite the pressure. He held regular all-staff meetings to update them on the company's progress, sharing both the good news and the challenges. He was open about the financial difficulties, but he also made sure to remind the team of the progress they had made over the past year. He thanked them for their hard work, for their resilience, and for their commitment to the company. One of the biggest moments came when the company received a major contract renewal from a longtime client. The contract, worth millions, was a huge win and a sign that the company was still on the right track. The CEO called an all-hands meeting to celebrate the success. Standing in front of his employees, the CEO was filled with a sense of pride. It had been a difficult few months, but this victory showed that their hard work and dedication had paid off. He looked out over the crowd, seeing familiar faces, employees who had stood by him through the tough times. "We did this together," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "This victory is a testament to all of you. We've faced challenges, but we've proven that we are stronger together. The culture we've built, the trust we've worked so hard to establish, has helped us reach this point. And this is just the beginning." The employees erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the room. For the first time in a long while, the CEO felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had worked hard to build a company where employees felt valued, and now, he could see the results of that effort. But even as they celebrated, the CEO knew that there was still much work to be done. The company had faced a serious challenge, but they had come out the other side stronger. The road to transformation had been long and difficult, and there would be more obstacles to overcome in the future. But for the first time in a long time, the CEO felt confident that they were on the right path. The downturn had tested the company's resilience, but it had also reinforced the CEO's belief in the importance of company culture. In times of uncertainty, it wasn't just the bottom line that mattered, it was the people who made the company what it was. And with the right people, anything was possible. The economic downturn had put the company through one of its most challenging periods, but now, with the contract renewal secured and the team still intact, the CEO knew it was time to rebuild. The company had proven that it could withstand tough circumstances, but the work wasn't over. Now was the time to capitalize on the progress they had made, to ensure that the changes they had fought so hard for were not only sustainable but capable of thriving in the long run. The CEO spent the weeks following the downturn focusing on two main areas: strengthening relationships with his leadership team and deepening his connection with the employees. He knew that the leadership team had a crucial role in ensuring the continued success of the cultural transformation. They were the ones who would set the tone for the entire company, and it was essential that they remained aligned with the company's new values and direction. To this end, the CEO began holding bi-weekly meetings with the senior leadership team, not just to review financials or discuss upcoming projects but to talk about the company's culture, values, and long-term goals. These meetings weren't about tactics, they were about vision and alignment. He encouraged his leadership team to be vulnerable, to share their challenges, and to actively engage in the process of evolving the company's culture. It was during one of these meetings that the CEO had a pivotal conversation with Marco, the Chief Financial Officer, CFO, who had been one of the skeptics when it came to the cultural shift. Marco had always been focused on numbers, spreadsheets, and results, and initially, he didn't see how employee engagement and well-being would lead to sustainable profits. However, the recent success and improved employee morale had begun to shift his thinking. "Let's talk about the results," the CEO began, addressing Marco and the leadership team. "I know this isn't easy for everyone, but we've seen the benefits of the changes we've made. We've retained top talent, we've seen an improvement in productivity, and most importantly, we've kept the morale of the company strong. These aren't just intangible benefits. They're translating into real results." Marco, who had always been the numbers guy, nodded slowly. "I have to admit, I was skeptical at first. I thought the focus on culture and employee happiness was a distraction. But looking at the data, you're right. We've seen productivity increase, and turnover rates are lower than they've ever been. I never thought I'd say this, but I think there's something to this approach." The CEO smiled, relieved to see that Marco was coming around. "It's not about choosing one over the other. We don't have to sacrifice financial success for employee well-being. In fact, I believe that prioritizing people is the key to long-term success." The meeting continued with other executives sharing similar insights. It was a breakthrough moment for the leadership team. They had all felt the tension between driving results and maintaining a positive culture, but they were now beginning to see that the two were not mutually exclusive. The shift in thinking was significant. The leadership team had not only embraced the changes but had started to believe in their power to drive sustainable growth. In the days that followed, the CEO continued to spend time in the trenches. He made it a point to be present in every department, speaking with employees at all levels of the organization. He had learned that it wasn't enough to just listen during town halls or hold occasional meetings. To truly lead, he needed to be where the work was happening, engaged with his people, understanding their challenges, and providing support where it was needed. One afternoon, while walking through the tech department, he stopped to chat with Naomi, a senior developer who had been with the company for nearly 5 years. Naomi had always been one of the quieter members of the team, but the CEO had noticed that she had become more outspoken in recent months, offering valuable suggestions during meetings and contributing to the company's growing sense of collaboration. "Naomi, how's everything going?" the CEO asked, leaning against the desk next to her. Naomi smiled, a bit surprised by the personal question. "Things are going well. We've been working on some new projects, and it's been a lot of fun, actually." The CEO nodded, genuinely interested. "I've noticed a shift in the way the teams are working together. It seems like there's more energy in the air. What do you think is driving that?" Naomi took a moment to think. "I think it's the way you've been encouraging us to collaborate more openly. I've never felt like my ideas were valued so much. Before, we were always just given tasks, and that was the end of it. But now, it feels like we're part of the decision-making process. There's more trust between departments, and it makes a difference. The CEO couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at her words. He had spent years focusing on metrics and output, but he had come to realize that a company's true strength lay in the people who worked there, their ideas, their creativity, and their passion. Naomi's words confirmed that the culture shift was having a tangible impact on the day-to-day workings of the company. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, a genuine smile on his face. "You and your team are doing incredible work. Keep it up." Naomi's face brightened. "Thank you. I feel like we're really making a difference." As the weeks continued to unfold, the CEO's connection with his employees deepened. He began to see that the changes they had made weren't just about improving morale or making the workplace more enjoyable, they were about creating an environment where employees could thrive, innovate, and push the company to new heights. It was a place where people felt heard, valued, and respected. But there was still a long way to go. While the cultural transformation had made significant strides, the CEO knew that the company's success in the long term would depend on their ability to maintain this momentum. One of the most important aspects of this was leadership development. If the company was going to continue to grow and evolve, the next generation of leaders had to be equipped with the skills and mindset to drive the company forward. To address this, the CEO launched a new leadership development program aimed at identifying and nurturing future leaders within the company. This program would focus on developing key leadership traits such as emotional intelligence, communication, collaboration, and adaptability. The CEO wanted to ensure that every level of the company had leaders who could inspire, motivate, and guide their teams through the inevitable challenges ahead. The first cohort of leadership candidates was selected from various departments, from finance to operations, marketing, and tech. These individuals were chosen not just for their skills and experience but for their potential to embody the company's core values and lead with integrity. The program was intensive, offering both formal training and real-world opportunities for these future leaders to take on more responsibility. It wasn't just about giving them the tools to succeed, it was about instilling in them the values that would help the company thrive in the long run. As the program progressed, the CEO began to see the results. The leadership candidates were eager to learn, taking the lessons they had learned in the program and applying them in their work. They became more confident, more collaborative, and more attuned to the needs of their teams. The CEO knew that this was the future of the company, that these individuals would be the ones to carry the torch forward. One of the leadership candidates, Raj, a young operations manager, stood out during a project where he had to lead a cross-functional team to improve operational efficiency. Raj was thoughtful, proactive, and inclusive in his approach, encouraging everyone on his team to contribute ideas and voice concerns. The project was a success, and Raj's leadership was a key factor in its outcome. The CEO took notice. He spent time with Raj, discussing his approach to leadership and the success of the project. "You're doing great work," the CEO told him. "Your team respects you, and you've built a culture of collaboration and trust. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need in the future." Raj smiled, humbled by the praise. "Thank you. I've learned a lot from the leadership program, but I also feel like the environment we're building here makes it easier to lead. People are more willing to work together when they feel valued." The CEO nodded, pleased with Raj's insight. "That's the key to it all. People are at the heart of everything we do. If we can keep nurturing a culture of trust, collaboration, and respect, we'll keep moving in the right direction." As the leadership development program continued to grow, the CEO began to see the broader impact of his efforts. The company's future was now in the hands of a new generation of leaders who understood the importance of people, culture, and values. The company had not just survived the downturn but had emerged stronger, more united, and more prepared for the challenges ahead. The CEO's journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but he had learned a valuable lesson along the way. True leadership is not about making decisions from the top down, but about empowering others, creating a culture of collaboration, and ensuring that every employee feels seen, heard, and valued. And as he looked ahead, he knew that the work was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt confident that they were on the right path. As the months turned into years, the CEO's vision for his company had evolved from a theory into a thriving, living organism. The company was no longer just an entity built on financial success and operational efficiency. It had become a place where employees felt valued, where their voices were heard, and where leadership was about empowerment, not authority. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was real, and it was working. The company was thriving in ways that the CEO had never imagined. Yet, despite the progress, the CEO knew that his work was far from finished. True leadership, he had come to realize, wasn't about simply making changes, it was about ensuring those changes were ingrained in the very fabric of the company. He had learned that leadership wasn't a position to be held, it was a responsibility to be earned every single day. At the heart of the transformation was the team of leaders he had helped develop. They were the ones who would carry the company forward long after he had moved on. The Leadership Development Program, which had started as an experiment, was now one of the company's cornerstones. It wasn't just a program, it was a philosophy, a way of life. The CEO had instilled the belief that leadership wasn't about titles or promotions, it was about the ability to connect with others, to lead with integrity, and to inspire those around you to be their best selves. It was clear to the CEO now that leadership was not something that came from the top down, but something that needed to be cultivated at every level. He had worked tirelessly to ensure that every manager, every team leader, and every employee felt empowered to lead in their own way. The future of the company depended on this new generation of leaders. They were the ones who would build on the foundation he had laid, and the CEO knew that they would carry the company's values forward. The Leadership Development Program had grown beyond just a few select individuals. The company now had a comprehensive system for identifying and nurturing talent at every level, and it was making a tangible impact. Employees who had once felt like cogs in a machine were now taking ownership of their work, contributing ideas, and making a difference. This new sense of ownership had resulted in a more innovative, dynamic workforce, one that wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo and push boundaries. The CEO could see the change in the company's culture everywhere he went. One afternoon, he walked through the marketing department and noticed a group of young employees collaborating on a new ad campaign. They were deep in conversation, brainstorming ideas and debating the best direction for the campaign. The CEO watched quietly from the doorway for a moment before one of the employees noticed him standing there. "Hey, there's the boss," she said with a smile, gesturing for him to come in. "We're just talking about the upcoming campaign. We'd love to get your thoughts." The CEO smiled and walked over to join them. "I'd be happy to hear what you're working on." It was clear from the energy in the room that something had shifted. The team wasn't waiting for approval from the top, they were taking initiative and driving the direction of the campaign themselves. The CEO was impressed by their enthusiasm and the confidence they exuded. They didn't see themselves as subordinates, they saw themselves as leaders in their own right, capable of influencing the company's direction. "This is great work," the CEO said, offering his feedback. "I'm really impressed with how much thought you've put into this. Keep pushing the boundaries. Don't be afraid to take risks." As he left the meeting, the CEO reflected on how far the company had come. Years ago, he would have been directly involved in the creative process, dictating the direction of the campaigns and ensuring that everything adhered to his vision. But now, he had learned to trust his people. The true measure of success wasn't about maintaining control, it was about empowering his team to take ownership of their work and giving them the freedom to innovate. This new approach had led to remarkable results. The company's profits were at an all-time high, but more importantly, employee satisfaction was also at its peak. Turnover rates had plummeted, and engagement scores had soared. The company had gone from being a place where employees felt like they were just another number to a place where they felt like they mattered, where their contributions were recognized and valued. But the CEO knew that these results couldn't be taken for granted. There would always be new challenges to face, and the company had to remain adaptable if it wanted to continue growing. The business world was constantly changing, and the company's ability to stay ahead of the curve would depend on its ability to continue evolving. To ensure that the company remained on track, the CEO had instituted a system of continuous feedback, both from employees and from the leadership team. Every quarter, they would evaluate their progress, assess what was working, and identify areas where they could improve. This feedback loop allowed the company to stay agile, responding quickly to changing circumstances and making adjustments as needed. One of the key initiatives that had come out of these evaluations was the focus on innovation. The CEO knew that in order to stay competitive, the company had to foster a culture of continuous improvement, where new ideas were welcomed, and failure was seen as an opportunity to learn rather than something to be feared. This focus on innovation had led to the development of several groundbreaking products, and the company was gaining a reputation as an industry leader in creativity and forward-thinking solutions. The CEO also realized that he couldn't do it alone. His success had been built on the strength of his leadership team, the dedicated employees, and the community they had built within the company. He was just one part of a much larger system, and it was the collective effort of everyone that had made the company what it was. The true mark of his leadership, he knew, wasn't in the results he had achieved personally, but in the success of the people he had empowered to lead. In one of his final meetings with the leadership team, the CEO addressed the group with a sense of fulfillment. "We've come a long way. This company is no longer the same place it was when I first started as CEO. But the truth is, the credit goes to all of you. The leadership team, the employees, every single person who's worked hard to make this company a place where people want to work. You've all taken ownership of the culture, and you've made it your own." There was a moment of silence as the team absorbed his words. The CEO paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "I couldn't have done this alone. You all believed in the vision, and together, we've created something that I'm truly proud of." The team nodded, their faces filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. It was clear that the CEO's leadership had made an impact, but they had also played a pivotal role in bringing the company to where it was today. The CEO knew that his time in charge was coming to an end, but he was confident that the company's future was in good hands. "Remember," the CEO continued, "the work doesn't stop here. We've built a solid foundation, but the world is always changing. We have to stay focused on the people who make this company great. We have to keep empowering them, keep listening, and keep adapting. That's how we'll stay ahead of the curve." As he finished speaking, the team erupted in applause. They had accomplished something remarkable, and they knew that the work they had done together would continue to shape the company for years to come. As the CEO looked around the room, he felt a sense of peace. The company was ready for the future, and it was no longer just his vision, it was theirs. They had all become leaders in their own right, and the company's success would be built on the collective efforts of everyone involved. As he left the room for the final time as CEO, the CEO felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long, challenging, and often uncertain, but it had also been the most rewarding experience of his career. He had helped shape the future of a company, not through control or command, but through trust, empowerment, and the belief that people, at every level, could be the driving force behind success. With the company on a solid footing, the CEO knew that he had left it in good hands. His work was done, but the legacy of the transformation he had begun would live on, carried forward by the next generation of leaders.